For this week's Wellbeing Wednesday, I want to talk about the concept of perfectionism and how perfectionism impacts our well-being. You would hear for years when somebody was going into a job interview and you were asked, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Many times somebody's weakness answer would be, well, I'm a perfectionist. And saying that, well, I want to make sure that I'm really striving to do everything perfect. And it was seen as not really a weakness, but a way to talk about a way of functioning and a way to focus on things. And people are often lauded for being that perfectionist. However, research shows us that perfectionistic thinking can actually be significantly detrimental to both our physical health and our mental health. We see that it can be tied to anxiety, depression, and unfortunately high rates of suicide and suicidal thinking. And we see that for especially certain populations like college students, the stress of school, or for individuals entering new jobs, times when the economy is dropping and individuals are afraid about their income, that we can see higher rates of perfectionistic thinking and perfectionism coming through. And while there's nothing wrong with being able to challenge ourselves and being able to have the thoughtful, critical thinking of our thoughts and our behaviors and constantly learn from it, when it reaches that threshold of true perfectionism, it can disrupt our ability to be productive. For many people, it actually makes them less efficient because they need to check things over and over to make sure that it's perfect. We see that it can have an impact on physical health, of impacting blood pressure, for instance, and other chronic diseases such as Crohn's disease and different GI disruptions. So what are some strategies and ways that we can think about this and focus on the idea of progress versus perfection? One area is to be shifting our thinking and recognizing that we are never going to be perfect at everything. And while we can strive for success, that small little steps along the way where we may have to pivot could be opportunities to learn, to shift our thinking instead of seeing it as a failure, but as an opportunity to learn. For many individuals, when they're working through perfection, they can actually find an activity of doing a rule grid to work for them. What do we mean by a role grid? Well, if you think through all of the different roles that you play in your life, are you a spouse? Are you a parent? Are you a sibling? Are you a child? What are all these different things as somebody, as a worker, as a student? And you think through all of the different activities that you do throughout the course of the day for each of those. Take a student, for instance. Maybe you have to study, go to class, write notes, create assignments, do homework. You could list out all of these different activities that play into that role. And by the end of the time you go through and complete the grid of how much time would you have to spend to do that perfectly, to do it very good, to do it poorly. When you go through and you put that in for every single role that you play, you'll realize that you're expecting yourself to perform at a threshold that exceeds the number of hours in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year. So that's where then we can look at each of these different aspects of our lives and say, let me choose what areas I'm okay to be very good at, and that's still an acceptable level and still something that the typical average person or even the above average person would be able to perform at that rate. Do we put pressures on ourselves to be putting 5 and 6 hours into something when there aren't that many hours in the day? How can we reframe our thinking to become more comfortable with what is actually attainable with the number of hours that we have in our day? Be well.